In this video, you will learn about the market equilibrium. For the terms that we'll use today, we have demand. Remember, demand is the relationship between price and quantity demanded, and they have an inverse relationship. Companies will have a sale by lowering price, which will increase quantity demanded. That's our inverse relationship because they move in opposite directions. Supply deals with price and quantity supplied. This is looking at the producers. If price goes down, then producers will want to supply less of it because they're receiving less money. You see this moving in the same direction, so that's a positive relationship. Demand is looking at the buyers and supply is looking at the sellers. Equilibrium is when we bring demand and supply together. This happens when quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied. And at this point, we'll also see demand equal to supply. When they are not equal is when we can get surpluses and shortages, and for that you'll learn about in another video. Equilibrium price is the overall price, or P, when quantity demanded equals quantity supplied, or when demand equals supply. Equilibrium quantity is the quantity when quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied. And you'll often see either the P and the Q, or at least the Q, denoted with a little e, and that tells you that it is referring to the equilibrium. So let's go ahead and draw this out. We have price on the vertical axis, quantity on the horizontal axis, and then we have a downward sloping demand and an upward sloping supply line. We find our equilibrium where the two lines intersect. This is our equilibrium. This is where demand is equal to supply. And that's how you show on a graph when two lines are equal to each other, by when they cross one another. When we come down, this is our equilibrium quantity. And then when we go to the vertical axis, that's how we get our equilibrium price. So let's see what it looks like in the textbook. And very similar. Point E is where we see that equilibrium. Jump back over to red so it's easier to see. So what would our equilibrium price be? Our equilibrium price is $1.40. And then what would our equilibrium quantity be? Our equilibrium quantity is 600. And that's how you find the equilibrium. Pretty easy, just where demand equals supply, where they intersect. Now, if we were to have changes in demand or supply, we're going to get changes in our equilibrium price and or equilibrium quantity. Let's say, for example, that demand increases. If we have an increase in demand, that means that we are going to shift to the right. So this line here, D1, that could be an increase in demand. And now we're going to get a new equilibrium point. We can call this E1. We come over to the left and we see that we get an increase in the equilibrium price. And then we come down to our horizontal axis and we see that we get an increase in our quantity, probably somewhere around 690. Now, something similar can happen if we have a change in supply. And we'll jump over to this graph to make it a little bit cleaner. So again, we're starting off where at point E, at our equilibrium at a price of $1.40 and a quantity of 600. And then if we were to have a, let's say, decrease in supply is going to shift us to the left. Call this S1, and that's our decrease. We have a new equilibrium point right here, call it E1, and for this we see an increase in price. But now when we look at quantity, we see a decrease in equilibrium quantity. I highly recommend that you draw out this graph whenever you have a question about the outcomes after a change in supply or demand after it's already achieved equilibrium. It makes it much easier to then figure out what changes we see in price and what changes we see in quantity. And that is market equilibrium.